Um, I teach at Western Carolina University, and so basically, for all intents and purposes, it's about like any other language class there. So in Cherokee 101, uh, we'll have the capacity of 25 students. Most of them will be non-Cherokee. We don't have that many Cherokees attending Western Carolina University, even though it's just 20 miles away. There's an effort to to reinvigorate our concept of education too and stuff. So we are working on it, but we do have that many, and then it probably drops down to about half and stuff in the next semester. But through these efforts, so we're finding a lot of young people who come to college who are going to who are going to major in another discipline, but a lot of times they'll join the Cherokee language, Cherokee Studies program, and sort of move into like history and anthropology and health. So it turns into be a good thing. Do we have any other questions?
I'm just wondering if you have any support for the work that you're doing with trauma-informed care from New York State Office of Mental Health. I know that there are practitioners, for example, as well, who work with people with psychiatric and non-psychiatric, for example, from a trauma-informed care perspective. And I was just wondering if you have any contact at all with any of that.
We haven't had, that I know of, contact with that. The efforts for the trauma-informed care approaches, introduction into our tribal government and into our health services clinic, which is primarily funded by Indian Health Service. We just did it on our own because it felt like it was the right thing to do, and we were actually doing it before we even discovered that there was trauma-informed approaches. So we were really excited about that. One of our challenges is getting everyone else on board with it, because when you start talking about trauma, people get uncomfortable, and then they say, "Oh, here comes Beverly. She's always so negative," you know. And we're trying to get them to turn it around and think about it in a more positive way. Yeah.
Louise, you mentioned the immersion school in your community. Could you talk a little bit about that?
The Akwesasne Freedom School was, it's got like a 35-year history now, and I'm really glad you asked that question because I wanted to mention it earlier, because it was a prediction made by an elder, and that school grew out of a desperate need of parents wanting to re-educate our children in our own ways. And the prophecy of the day was, an elder said, we have to educate our children 200%, 100% in our way and 100% in the Western way. He says, because the world will begin to face a time when it'll get so dire, and then the eyes of the world will be upon our children, and they'll have something important to say. So all the work that gets done on the ground is working toward that day. So when we take a look at environment and those things that are happening, that day is soon. So the Akwesasne Freedom School is doing that work, preserving the language, living the language, and projecting it into a time that it's going to be needed, just like my brother Tom here. It encapsulates that old knowledge, that wisdom, and it has the answers. Not just for us, but for everybody. So the Akwesasne Freedom School embodies at the heart mankind's humanity, and survival. And that's what I love about the school. And it flourishes. So it continues to reflect and to be the face of what our ancestors once were and what will soon be again. So that's what I like about the school. No.
Um,
Do I have 20 minutes?
We're running uncharacteristically ahead of time.
There were, as doom and gloom as some of the subject matter was that I was talking about, and some of you have the ACE study now in your hands, and when you look at it, it can be very, they're very intimate questions, and they can raise some very, I don't even want to raise a lot of emotion when you're looking at it. For some people, some are fortunate and haven't had to have those experiences. But what I wanted to say was that there are things within our health services and in our community, such as Ohologo, such as the Freedom School, that are positive and are the antidote to those things. And one of the things that I was fortunate to be able to bring to our clinic that was mentioned in Gudji's introduction was a centering pregnancy program. What the other part that I want you to know is that the influence that we can have to the positive on how life comes to us through the birth of our babies is a real powerful tool. And it's one of those things that I think for our people is an act of sovereignty, an act of power that sometimes we don't think about having. Our influence on a woman who's pregnant, say, we'll start there. She's pregnant, she's already pregnant. She's carrying a daughter. She's carrying a baby girl. That little baby girl that's floating around inside of the mother is already, while she's growing her lungs and growing her brain and all the other essential parts of her, is also growing her ovaries, and all the eggs that she's ever going to use for the rest of her life are inside of those little ovaries while she's still inside of her mother's belly. So how that mother is treated and how that mother is spoken to, how she's touched, how she's embraced, how she feels, those feelings and those emotions get translated to the baby through various chemicals in her body and various interactions inside of her body and get embedded in her genes. So when I was looking at my own daughter who was pregnant with my granddaughter already had the eggs inside of her that were going to produce my great-granddaughter. And I could influence her. I could reach out and touch her by being kind to my daughter. And I don't even know my great-granddaughter yet. She's not even here. But somehow I hope that I influenced her in a good way, and that my daughter's husband influenced her in a good way by the way he treated her. So that's a powerful tool that we have to counteract those things that imagine what a pregnant mom experiences in a violent relationship, in a traumatic relationship, those types of fears and worries and concerns that get translated to that baby, and that baby gets born under that influence. But not only that, to be aware that baby girls, future babies, are already being influenced by that. So the field of epigenetics goes far and deep, and if we understand it, we can use it to our good. So Centering Pregnancy is a program where we get pregnant moms who are about the same gestational age, and we put them in a circle, and we have them help each other, talk to each other, share stories with each other. And they learn through that process over the 9 months that they're getting. Also, that's their prenatal care. They learn to trust each other. They learn things that they never heard before. They feel safe enough to disclose maybe an unhealthy relationship. Um, the fathers are invited to attend. The grandmothers can come if they want to. So it's a real important part of community building. So it's not all doom and gloom. The information that we have about the damage that can be done to our children through violent acts, we can turn that around and we can make it good. So I wanted to, that's the other part of what I wanted to talk about. So my niece, I want to mention my niece, Randy Barrero. When we were talking about, she was helping me with this talk, and she said, all of this that you're talking about is how important and how our knowledge goes from eggs to ashes, how we care for each other from eggs to ashes. I thought it was brilliant. She is brilliant, but that's a real powerful awareness that we should carry with us all the time.
It seems to be an extension of that line,
Yes,
that
absolutely.
ever-going, continuous
Yeah.
line. There is no end to it, because it is true, it is real, and
Mhm.
it exists
Mhm.
forever.
And I noticed that there's a lot of young men in this audience, which makes me even happier that you're here. And I want to say that you have just as much to do with those babies that get born in your genes, and to the mothers and the fathers that raise young men like this, how you treat them around that time when they're just going into puberty themselves, which is why the rites of passage is so important. How you're handled, how you're treated, how you're talked to influences how your genes are going to express themselves later on, because that's when you start to produce, you know.
I
You
think that
start to
there,
come into your manhood. Anyway, that
I'm,
that's where your DNA gets molded and fashioned, is what I'm trying to say. So that, as parents, we have big responsibility that way.
I think that there have been some studies to show that the types of all things are connected to this in the way a person is raised, in the way in which they begin at conception. The food that the mother eats has implications about how that child is going to be, the conditions in which they are. But there have been some studies done that says that when you introduce the right kinds of food and the right kinds of thinking, the right kinds of attitudes, the right kind of environment, those things that have been, those cells, those enzymes, all of those things that make up how a person is going to be, when you introduce the correct way of doing stuff, then it alters that and it changes it back. It can be done. But once again, it speaks to that thing that I was talking about, and having a concept of the right way. And you have to do that in all, I mean, you have to try and adhere to it in the best possible way you can.
There's a question over here.
Yes. Hello. First, I want to say thank you. I'm a Cherokee Doctor of Public Health student who's actually getting ready to defend my dissertation on maternal mental health in pregnancy and birth outcomes. So I connected a lot with what all of the speakers had to say. And I wanted to ask Beverly to speak a little bit more about how you actually were able to introduce the centering pregnancy model. I think that all the speakers have touched on the fact that we have the knowledge to change things for our health and our communities. But just having that knowledge requires actually doing something to make the improvements happen. And we have to change the structures that are not always compatible with those ways of thinking. And it can be very difficult to institute new things. And I know the centering pregnancy model actually is a Western model of care. And so I wanted to hear a little bit more about how you were able to adapt that and integrate that into your health system in your community.
That's a real good question. The idea, it started in a teepee out in South Dakota, with my sister cousin Gudgy. We were talking about how I was noticing some of our prenatal patients were coming into their, conventional prenatal visits, and it seemed to me like they were walking down the hall, kind of looking at their nails and fixing their hair, and I didn't see that they had this real consciousness about the fact that they were pregnant and maybe the things that they needed to change in their life. Because the old people would say, you can't, I wouldn't let my daughter go and get acrylic nails put on when she was pregnant. Are you kidding? Or, we had other things about, even wearing necklaces while you're pregnant or having your ears pierced while you're pregnant, like certain things that you're supposed to pay attention to and be conscious of. So we were talking about that, and Gudgy had come across this model and had met CNM, Sharon Schindler Rising, who had actually developed or put together that particular model of prenatal care to market it. And anyway, so we went to a training together and experienced for a week the training on how to facilitate the group and how the model was run, what the 13 essential elements were, and so on and so forth. I came back from that training. I was so excited. My one trepidation, though, was the fact that it was a group, that our communities are very close, and how were they going to sit in front of each other? And I don't, what if that's her ex-boyfriend, and all those issues that come up in small communities, and were they going to be able to keep each other's confidentiality? That was my one concern, and I'm glad to report that after 4 years, we haven't had one instance of a mother complaining that she heard anything that she disclosed in those circles outside of the circle, and I think that's a testament to the respect that the women have for each other. So anyway, I came back with this exciting new idea. The nurses bought into it. They didn't even have to listen to it twice. They thought it was great. I went to my health director, and she said, that's all great, except that we have no room, we have no space, we have no money, we have no extra nurses, and no. So we waited a year. I kind of pouted around. It didn't work. And so we had to wait 2 years. And finally, a department got moved out of one office and into another office. We somehow ended up hiring a couple extra nurses, and the space became available, and the timing was just right. And so we actually, it was my health director who was the key to all of it. And I said, I think this is the way we should be delivering prenatal care, and to do it any other way, knowing that there's this way that we have as an option, would be a dereliction of duty. I mean, it's just, so she just folded it into the way that we do prenatal care. They have, in some facilities, the women have an option to say, no, I don't want to do that. I'd rather see the doctor in the office. And I'm kind of a bully sometimes, and I just said, no, you don't have a choice. This is the way we're doing it now. So they actually do have a choice. They can go outside of our facility and see a physician in their office if that's what they want to do. But if they want to get their prenatal care inside of our clinic, then they do it through centering. And they love it. At first, it's kind of strange. They don't know all the girls. They're kind of shy. But by the end of the 10 months or 9 months that they're in centering, they come out of there loving each other and caring about each other's babies. And we have another session afterwards where they bring all their babies, and that it's just a big love fest. And there's, breastfeeding going on, and pooping and changing diapers, all kinds of things going on, and the moms actually want us to continue it. There is a centering parenting model that goes along with it that we haven't instituted yet, but it was just the right people in the right place at the right time, and not giving up on it, because I could easily have said, I forget it. but we hung on to it, and we're doing well.
Several methodologists who work for the Smithsonian Institution, and my team members went to Cherokee country in North Carolina and wrote several papers that had to do with Cherokee childhood. And in there, I think it was an Ulrich's paper that talked about the word OC. Could you expand on that understanding in terms of use of the OC for recovery from pregnancy or its role in understanding childhood?
The word OC is a word that indicates a structure that was built outside of the family structure, where a mother was taken at the time of childbirth. Her and all of the people who were going to be involved with that, her mother, of course, and her aunts were there, and outside of it would have been an attending physician, if you want to say that, or a healer. He wasn't really involved in anything that was going on there. It was a very small structure and very intimate, and songs were sung in there, and medicinal properties were handed to them to be administered. And this is the way it was done. And then she would be with the child. I gather from the stories that we have, she and all of the women would be with the child for at least 24 hours by themselves to find out find out things about that child, to bestow on it certain kinds of things, prayers, all of those kinds of things that are stuff that I'm not privileged to speak about. But all of these things were done in a ceremonial way, and that's the way the child's first view, his first exposure to the world, or her first exposure to the world, was handled. And then began the life ways of that child. But it's interesting because that word OC is also a word that we use from the word good, OC. Everything is good. Or Osta. The shortened form, the shortened form of Osta is OC. So, and in this day and time, we use it for, it has been used up until recently. Many of the older people in Oklahoma would use this term to mean stove too. The OC was a place in where was our hospital. All things pertaining to the treatment of certain kind of things were done inside that house, and it was usually kept real warm. And so that term handed over into stove now, which incidentally means food. So I'm back to where I'm always at. It's always about food and stuff like that. But you know what? It's all about health, isn't it? And it's all about all things being good and stuff. And this is how a child started in the company, and the child could be a boy or a girl, but we are in that time we all started that way, in the company of our grandmothers, in the company of our mothers, and in the company of our aunts. In our language, our when we say our aunt, a lot of times we have a word for that, ehlogin, but I've also heard them call their second mothers and their uncles being their second fathers, because certainly our first cousins, we say in our language, Tone, Dulce Don Hudling, my second brother. So your first cousins are your second brothers, and of course all of that indicates a extended family and stuff. So I don't know how it was where you guys grew up, but I remember when I was growing up, any adult, no matter where it was, even if you didn't know them, was kind of your parent, you know, which also means they could discipline you, you know. So no matter where I went someplace, if I was doing something wrong when I was smaller and stuff, I could get switched by somebody I didn't even know. And if I went and told my folks, I'd get switched again. It's best to keep it quiet. You've done wrong and stuff like that. But we all raised each other's. Every child was your child.
I didn't, I just wanted to switch the subject and then we can go back, but you had also asked about how we incorporated some of our culture and teachings into the Centering Pregnancy, and that was another thing that we took the liberty of moving some of the chapters around. Like each month there was a certain thing, like maybe breastfeeding or discomforts of pregnancy, that sort of thing. Every month there's a topic to talk about, and we moved that around and interjected early on our creation story into the Centering Pregnancy. So there was a reference for them to get in touch with their history, with their roots, with the original teachings of our ancestors long ago, but also how that creation story relates to conception and pregnancy and birth as well. And some of the teachings that go inside of that are what Tom was talking about, how the nutritional status of the mother, dictates how that baby's going to start putting itself together, and all those other teachings that go with that. So we just naturally incorporate it in there, so they learn it just as part of the curriculum that's laid out there.
One of the things that I might add to that is several months ago, there was a group of us were sitting around and talking about that, about such, and we had to say that probably before contact and for a century or two afterwards, probably maybe even all the way up until the 20th century, among the Cherokees, a young girl growing up probably knew about as much about raising a child and having a child as about any adult woman. So by the age of 12, because she was raised that way, because she was born that way, because so much effort had been put into prenatal ceremony. I'm not even going to call it that. I think it's medical regimen. I mean, that's what they call it among in modern medicine. That they took that very seriously, and because of all the ways in which she came into the world, because of all the things she was surrounded with, because of the nature of everything, nutrition, food, all these things. We would say things like, for example, a woman wasn't supposed to stand in the doorway while she was pregnant. If you stopped in the doorway and you leaned against it, it might mean that was going to hinder the birth. So anytime you came to a doorway, it set a way of thinking in their minds. You couldn't sit on rocks, and stuff. All of these things would have to be taught. I mean, this woman would have as she was carrying the child, and then afterwards, postnatal stuff, an incredible amount of stuff that I can't even talk about. When this was followed, when it was done that way, and on into the years as she was a toddler, she was growing up, she was reminded, surrounded by all of these, by this matrilineal society her grandmothers being very, very important, and her aunts. The way in which she was taught, the way in which she was, in the way in which she was brought up, in the way in which she began to interpret the world, it was, we thought that by the time they were 10, you know, or 11, you know, they pretty much knew how they were going to conduct themselves or not, you know, but at least they knew what to do. And so by that time, they were already preparing to someday to have kids or not have kids. That was their choice. But if they did decide to have children, by the time they were 10, they already knew how to do that, you know. And it was something that was respected by all men. And so we evolved, we had this very healthy society, you know, and it was, and it replicated itself every generation. And so there's a lot of knowledge there. It just wasn't, you know, myth. There's a lot of practice and myth and applied science to it. And it made real healthy people, mentally, physically, you know. And I also wanted to add that to the question about how many students we had, Western Carolina University has been very, very gracious in accepting his program into its language program, although it's kind of ironic. A language program at Western Carolina is called Modern Foreign Languages. And our language is in that. But that's kind of a fun thing, so we like that. And, you know, we also conduct a class at North Carolina, at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And so we have a class in the afternoon, and their class is on TV. And so we have about 15 students at Chapel Hill who are also part of this class. And so much so that the state of North Carolina at this time has accepted Cherokee language as one of its foreign language requirements. So if you go to any school, North Carolina University school system, if they offer a class like that and you take it, it counts. And we're also extending that to the local high schools too. In other words, if you take Cherokee language in the counties that are around the Qualla boundary, at Graham County, Swain County, if you take Cherokee language in high school there, then you can go to Western Carolina University and you'll get credit for it. So that's a couple of extra hours you don't have to work for. You know. So, we're starting to make progress, so, little by little. Do we have any other questions?
Doesn't seem like there are any more questions. It's about 2:50. If we take a 15-minute break, come back 5 after 3. We have a very good following program after the break. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.